Okay, I believe we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to talk about stuff and things. Does that sound all right? I'm on today with the Amateur Exegete,
Hey,
and we have been
hi.
very good, very glad to have you on. We've
Thank you.
actually been trying to have this conversation behind the scenes. We've been talking for what would you say it was 2 months, something like that?
It's got to be 2 months. It's got to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stuff just kept coming up. Uh, you know, kept getting hit with all sorts of things, cars, work schedules. It's a
Yep.
lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm glad you're finally here. Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
So, I guess the best place to start is the beginning. So, tell us, kind of your background, and also I hear you write a blog.
Yeah. Yeah. So I grew up a King James only, young Earth creationist, a dispensationalist, so all the theological buzzwords. Um, Eventually moved into Presbyterianism, so I became a Calvinist. Um, and then not long after that, maybe 5 or 6 years later, I think I was about 30, almost 31, became an atheist. I've always loved the Bible, always interested in the Bible. You there?
Yep. Okay. I
Oh,
heard
okay.
you. I heard you say you're always interested in the Bible. Yeah, like I said, the OBS kind of makes my internet go, huh, and so.
Okay, good.
But
Okay. Thought it was
but
me. But
I
either
heard you.
way,
Yeah.
yeah. So interested in the Bible. Have always loved it, loved reading it, have been fascinated by it. And so a couple years ago, 2017, I believe it was, I started the Amateur Exegete blog. Um, and have been writing there ever since. So
Yeah.
that's it in a nutshell.
You write some very interesting articles.
Well,
Uh,
I hope so. I
it's
find them interesting.
well, that's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, it's very interesting to look at. That's kind of one of the areas that if I weren't doing biology, there two other places I would like to spend more time learning about stuff is ancient history because I
Mhm.
feel like so much of it is horrendously misrepresented or misunderstood in like popular culture and stuff,
Yeah.
and epistemology. I like
Oh yeah.
both. I think both of those are very very interesting, and but I spend pretty much all of my time reading about evolution.
Well, I mean, did you have a choice? I mean, you're in a degree program, right? So
Yeah, yeah, it's
there'll be time. There'll be time in the future.
that's true. Yeah, I've only got 40 years until I retire, so I got time.
Exactly.
um, but yeah, you you talk about a lot of stuff. Correct like myth or misunderstandings that people have. Are there any topics really that come up on your blog a lot, or more
Well,
so than usual?
yeah. Well, the Gospel of Mark comes up a lot just because it's my favorite gospel, and so I write about it frequently. Um, I noticed last year looking at my stats that counter apologetics seems to be a pretty popular category for me to write about. People
Sure. Yeah.
tend to like to read those, or they read them. I don't know if they like them, but they read them. Um, so, uh, but yeah, so that tends to be a pretty popular category. I try to stay away from topics like evolution or philosophy, just because they're not my areas. I have no area of expertise. That's why I'm the amateur exegete. But I'm more comfortable, I'm more at home with the Bible. And so I talk about the Bible, especially the New Testament. So I try to stick with textual issues, issues of interpretation, um, how to read the text, in my opinion, correctly. Because it's, you know how, I mean, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but there are certain pop apologists who who read the Bible so poorly. It really makes me wonder if they're being serious.
Right.
They are, but so I tend to write about some of those issues, you know, on that.
Yeah. Definitely. Are you like fluent in any ancient languages?
Yeah, so I know I took Greek and Hebrew in college.
Hmm.
My Greek is uh, a million times better than my Hebrew will ever be, just because I use it a lot more. I'm not as comfortable in Hebrew. But there's people on Twitter that I can kind of message if I have a question. Elisha Ben, I forget how you pronounce that last name of his. It's based on a character from I think a midrashic text. But so I'll periodically ask him questions because he is fluent. You know, he's from Israel.
Right.
He knows the Hebrew Bible really well, so he's my go-to for that and commentaries and stuff. But my Greek, I know Greek fairly well. You know, I can read it. I spend time in it daily. Like every morning, I'm in the Gospel of Mark. I'm currently working through First Thessalonians in preparation for season 2 of my podcast. So I'm
Nice.
reading it in Greek and in English. So, um, yeah. So Greek and Hebrew are the big ones. I'm learning French though
Ah,
through
français.
Duolingo. You know the little app Duolingo.
Oh
Have you
yeah.
seen that? So I'm taking. I'm doing pretty good. I can say like cat and woman and man.
Parles-tu français?
Yeah, something like that. I guess I don't know. Is that French? Is that?
Yeah. The word for cat is Shaw, so it's
Yep.
just CHAT. You know?
Yep. I know those words. Doing well.
Yeah, that's well, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. French is I love it. It's a beautiful language.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm yeah, I'm sad that it because I took 5 years of it in like between middle and high school, but then I don't use it anywhere for absolutely anything. And so
Yeah,
it's
that's the reason I want to learn. I want to learn French and German. Is a lot of biblical scholarship
mm,
is written in those languages and not always available in translation. So, if I want to read it, I need to learn the languages. So that's what I'm hope. That's what I'm building towards. That's the goal.
yeah, sure, yeah, it's best to read it in its original language and stuff. Because
Yeah.
I read was it Thus Spake Zarathustra, which is Nietzsche, and his
Mm-hmm.
the German to English is just oof, it's rough. It's rough reading that kind of stuff. I don't know if it's just because it was from
Nietzsche.
yeah, right, yeah. It's like is it just because it's from that time period, or it's just him, or it's the
Yeah,
translation? I don't know.
he is rough to read in English. So I can't imagine in German. Oh,
Just frantic yelling at people, I
it's
guess.
very Germanic. That's what they do. That's what.
Right, yeah. Um, so uh, you mentioned that you were once a, a young earther, and
Mm-hmm.
so I'm interested to know is Genesis meant to be taken as literal history because we're told so often that it is by Ken Ham and Kent Hovind. So
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Um, so let me start by saying what I don't think it is.
okay,
So a lot of more modern exegetes, in a bid to reconcile science with the Bible, will take the days of Genesis as allegorical or symbolic. And so there's like the day age theory. I think Hugh Ross leans toward this, where each day represents an epoch of time. I don't think that's what's going on in the text. I don't think that's what's going on is because the ancient author of those texts would not have thought that way.
right,
I
yeah,
mean, whoever wrote this, we don't know who they were, but they were likely a priest. Okay, they had a very specific worldview rooted in the ancient Near East, not rooted in modern science. So there's no way that they thought the days of Genesis were representative of large epochs of time. They
sure,
thought the world was probably pretty young. Um, but does that mean that the young Earth creationists are right in their reading? Well, not necessarily. I think the days are literal days. But I think, like I said, it's an approximation, or it's a Genesis 1 is not history, it's religious literature. And it's designed to show that the God of Israel is ordered and he sets things up in a way for religious purposes. So when you read things like the creation of the sun, moon, and stars, on day 4. It says in that text that they were created for days and for seasons, for I think weeks and years. I think it says these are for a calendar,
Hmm.
because what do you need when you have religious festivals like Passover and the Sabbath and things like
Right.
you need a calendar, and these heavenly bodies are that calendar. So Genesis 1, I think it's obviously religious literature, and that's its primary function. It's meant to show that God, Elohim, is a ordered God. He's a God of not of chaos. He conquers the chaos. The world is the verse 2 says that the earth was formless and void. It was tohu vavohu, and so he comes into that chaos and he makes something of it. And so, yeah, the young Earth creationists are right that the days are literal days. They are wrong that Genesis 1 is history. It's just not.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. That's very interesting. I think there was a movie that came out that was like Genesis is history or something like that.
Oh, was it Eric Hovind? Is that who it was?
Well, he did the Genesis Paradise Lost, which
That's what it was.
was kind of I don't recommend anyone watch it. It was garbage. But
Well, it's Eric Hovind. You can just say that. And we know it's garbage.
it came from one of the Hovens, so it
Yeah,
can't be that great. Um,
exactly.
yeah, it's basically a love fest between Eric Hoven and Answers in Genesis. They're just kind of like just really reading the passages, and they're making animations to show, oh, there were dinosaurs here too, and here, look, we have the scientific argument. That's where they brought in like David Menton and Jason. Did they have Jason Lyle? No, they didn't have Jason Lyle. They had a couple other people who they, I know it was David Menton, but who they brought in, and were like, we have scientific arguments for why, you know, Genesis is history and all that.
Yeah.
And
It's
so,
well, I mean, I used to buy into that. I still have a ton of books in my library that are young Earth creationists
and we
from when I
have
was young.
lots. We have several people watching. Hello, everyone. We have Purple Pill Philosophy, for Causa de Velletri. I'm sorry about that. Nestling. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Um, so, so Genesis is not history. So what about the next book of the Bible, Exodus? Is that meant to be taken as history?
Yeah. So the book of
I love that response, by the way.
the problem is you get no matter what I say, I'm going to get in trouble because
Uh
those who
oh.
take the Bible literally are going to say, "Well, he's a heretic." And if I say, "Well, it's mythology," or if I say it's history, then the atheists are going to be like, "Oh, he's capitulating to the fundamentalists." So, but I really don't care. Exodus is a foundation myth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whether or not there was a historical Exodus is another issue. There might have been. If there was, it was certainly not on the scale that Exodus describes. I mean, I think in numbers, it lists the number of people at well over 600,000. And that's just men. So if you include women and children, you're looking at 1 to 2, maybe 3 million people who wander through the Sinai and leave no trace.
Right.
And they're not mentioned in Egyptian texts. There's no evidence for them whatsoever. So I tend to think, I lean toward Richard Elliott Friedman's view. He's a Jewish scholar. He thinks what happened was there was an exodus. It was a very specific exodus of the Levites. So a small religious group who left Egypt with belief in Yahweh as their God, and they come into the Levant, they come into Canaan, where they encounter the confederation of tribes, of which would become the nation of Israel, and they integrate with them, and they bring their deity with them. Yahweh becomes what they were worshiping, and they were probably worshiping a variety of gods. El, who was the high god of the Ugaritic pantheon, Baal, who was the storm god, and you kind of see this the merging of Yahweh with these deities. For example, in the book of Daniel, which is, lately has been a topic of conversation. Dr. Josh Bowen has
That's
done
right.
some videos in the book, and of course, our favorite pop apologist has written terribly contrived blogs on it. But the image in Daniel chapter 7 of the Ancient of Days is likely taken from the god El, who was the high god, the father of all the gods in the Canaanite pantheon. And elsewhere in the Bible, you read of, like, it talks about how God is, or Yahweh is, riding on the clouds in the sky. Well, this is imagery taken directly from Baal, who was the storm god, who is described in ancient texts that predate the Bible as riding on the clouds and bringing storms with him. So I think there probably was an Exodus. It was a small group, if anything. It was probably, you're probably talking 11th, 10th century maybe, BCE, so right at the beginning of the Iron Age. But it was nowhere near what what it was as described in Exodus. And you can you see it in other ways. The description of Moses' birth.
Are you telling me they did not part the Red Sea?
I don't think they did. I don't. In fact, I was reading today. I'm going through the book of Joshua right now, and I was reading in chapter, I think it's 4, where they cross the Jordan, the priests do, and they take the ark, and the water splits. So it's another story, just like the Exodus. They will just recapitulate and reiterating this myth. But there's other elements in Exodus, like the birth of Moses. Moses is this savior figure, but he's described as being born, and then he's put in a little boat and floated down the river Nile, where he's discovered by the princess, the daughter of the Pharaoh. Well, this story sounds very similar to the story of Sargon the Second, or not Sargon the Second. No, maybe Sargon the Second, but he's the Assyrian ruler, who is, according to the myth, birthed and then put in a boat and sent down the river. I think it's Euphrates, and he's discovered by a gardener, and he's endowed, or he's commissioned by the goddess Ishtar, to do these amazing things as the king. These stories are very similar. They're just, it's not plagiarized, but it's just this this free borrowing of stories from one another. And the Israelites borrowed stories. That's what they did.
Is that syncretism?
I mean, that's probably a word you could use. I think a better term would be like intertextuality, where they just have no problem borrowing from one another. Stephanie Daly, who she has a book, Myths of Mesopotamia, and in her introduction, she talks about this, and she says, this happens all the time. You can call it plagiarism, whatever, but what it is just people are reading each other, or they're hearing each other's stories, because these are oral cultures, and they're just borrowing, and that's cool. That's all right. I mean,
sure,
why not? We do it today.
That's true. So would you say both Genesis and the flood story were also kind of the same? Because we had to read the Epic of Gilgamesh, in high school, and you're like, wow, this. Well, at least with regard to Utnapishtim, you're kind of like, this sounds familiar.
Yeah. In fact, I believe Stephanie Daly, who I mentioned, suggests that I think it's Utnapishtim. The middle part of his name may be where the name Noah was originally derived. Huh. It's possible. It's not definitive,
Sure.
But yeah, that story, and that the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Atrahasis, Eridu Genesis, all these stories go back before the Bible, and the biblical authors just borrow motifs and they change it. That's important to realize. Is these are borrowed stories, but they're specifically changed, so they end up being quite different. And I think a lot of atheists, when they read these stories and how compare them, like, see all the similarities. This is all nonsense. Well, I mean, scientifically, but on a religious level, the differences are what's really interesting. That's what's really interesting is the differences, not the similarities. So I think we would do well to appreciate what the biblical authors have done in their versions of their stories.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's an interesting way of putting it. But you're right. I do see that that all the time, and I think it goes too. Well, I don't think it. I know it goes too far, where they try to make the same sort of comparisons between like Jesus and other deities, which, oof.
Oh yeah, Horus or Tammuz and oh yeah, Dionysus I think is one or not
Or
Dionysus.
Mithras, that's another one.
Mithras, that's what it is. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean,
Although I
there's
have seen
interesting parallels.
Dionysus.
Yeah, yeah. Why did Dionysus come to mind? I think I was reading in a commentary on First Thessalonians and it came up. But either way, yeah, there's interesting parallels. But I don't, you know, Tim O'Neill. I don't know if you've interacted with Tim at all.
I've seen a little bit of his stuff.
Yeah, he's got some excellent posts at his website. Chris Hansen, who's a Unicorn Whiz on Twitter, he deals with this stuff. He's a young guy in college and just brilliant. I mean, I hate him because, you know, here I am in my 30s, he's in his 20s, and he's got way more knowledge about these things. It's just brilliant about that stuff.
Yeah, it's really fun. I follow a bunch of different biblical history people because it is interesting to see you guys interacting both with the pop apologists, who we can talk about shortly, but also the bad atheist memes that float around out there because some of them are just truly awful.
Oh yeah, there was one yesterday that was just
Oh, do tell.
Well, Randall Rouser, who's a Christian apologist, who I have a lot of respect for, he retweeted it,
I
and I think the meme was if you should follow him. The guy knows how to reframe an argument. Like he will, if he wants to take your side if he wants to present your side, he will thoroughly try to understand your side. So he doesn't strawman it; he steelmans it. But either way, the meme was something like it was a picture of Jesus, and it said, "If I couldn't even save myself, what makes you think I could save you?" I'm like, first of all, that's verbatim from the people that mock him on the ground as he's dying on the cross. You know, he said he could save others, but he can't even save himself. And for some of the biblical authors, Jesus' death serves as a sacrifice for humanity. He deliberately gave himself up.
Right.
So why would he have saved himself if the purpose of his death was to save humanity? So it's just a terrible, terrible, terrible reading of those stories in the Gospels. But I think that was from Atheist Republic, which
oh man,
they've been more missed than hit lately.
Yeah, it's like they're a popular group, but they retweet a lot, or they put out there a lot of really bad memes, and just at some point it's like you guys are doing more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to help, point people to resources, not these pitiful memes.
Yeah.
Okay. Nestlig is asking about were the early Hebrews henotheists, and could you explain that, please?
Yeah. So monotheism is the belief that there is only one God. Polytheism is the belief that there are many gods. And then there's some other terms that we can use. There's monolatrous, which means you worship only one God. And then there's henotheism, which states that there are many gods and there is one supreme God. I think I'm representing that correctly. So the question is, were the early Israelites henotheists? And I would say that to some degree they were. I think that you see this all throughout the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, where there's references to other deities. So, for example, in Exodus, when the plagues come on, one of the things that God says to Moses is, I am bringing these plagues on Egypt and on the gods of Egypt. Well, you can't bring judgment on something that doesn't exist. So obviously the biblical author thought, oh, yeah, there's gods. They're just not our God, and they're not as great as he is. So I think it's pretty clear. Now, apologists will try to work around it, and they'll try to say, well, like I was listening to a podcast recently about Michael Heiser's view that the what's going on isn't so much that there's other gods; it's just that there's other spiritual entities, and
Hmm.
they're not gods in the same way Yahweh is. And I'm just
Hmm.
like, now you're just kind of playing with semantics. You're just kind of it doesn't really it doesn't appeal to me to make that kind of argument. Obviously, the ancient Israelites believed in multiple gods, that they existed,
Hmm.
but only Yahweh was deserving of worship because only Yahweh rescued them from Egypt.
Right.
No one else came to their aid. It
Hmm.
was Yahweh and Yahweh alone who came and saved them from the Pharaoh. And but they still acknowledge other gods, whether it's Moloch, which his existence is debated, or Baal, or Asherah, or
Right. Yeah.
Baal, all these deities, Chemosh, who is the god of the Moabites. These gods, in the minds of the authors, existed,
Yeah.
but they had very little power compared to Yahweh. And there's other texts that kind of laid that out. Deuteronomy 32 has a section. There's a psalm, I think it's Psalm 89. But so yeah, I would say yes, they were henotheists. They were polytheists who worshiped the one God of Israel, Yahweh. That's how I would answer that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. There are references to Asherah, but there was like a retranslating that it meant stick or totem instead of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with it is there's not so it seems that the worship of Asherah revolved around some kind of, and I'm going a little bit outside of what I know about this, but just from what I remember, that it involved worshiping at sacred poles,
Hmm.
these kind of like tree-like things, and so you kind of see the polemic against them especially in like the
The
books of Kings.
polemic against them, huh?
Oh yeah, oh
Huh,
man, I
huh.
wish I had. Man, don't do that. I need to write these down so I can get the credit.
Right.
Oh, but either way, you see this over and over again where these polemic against these false deities, like Richard Elliot Friedman, who I referenced earlier. Excuse me. He talks about how the the conflict between Elijah and the prophets of Baal in the book of, I think it's First Kings. He says that what happens is he thinks that Yahweh wipes out the prophets of Baal, but with them are all these prophetesses of Asherah. So what happens when your God destroys the other God? What does he do? Well, he takes his wife for his own. Asherah becomes the consort of Yahweh, which there's some evidence that there was worship of Yahweh and his wife, the Asherah. So
Hmm.
now whether that reflects the historical Israel is another matter. But it's possible. It's interesting to think about. So
Yeah, certainly.
Yahweh had a wife. He had a side piece. It's
Right. Hey,
pretty intense.
everybody's everybody's got to get some every once in a while, right?
Yeah, even a god.
Even a god,
True.
the creator of the universe.
That's right. That's right.
Um, it
If it's
is.
not Mary, it's Asherah. So
Well, Mary was later, but um, it, it's kind of interesting. Actually, I guess I'll ask this first. So how does our favorite pop apologist deal with such things, or does she,
she does.
just doesn't? Okay, all right.
So she's not reading scholarship.
Uh-huh.
She's reading apologetics. Okay.
Right.
So
The
she's not
blind
gonna
leading the blind, huh?
oh yeah, that's an apt way to put it.
Yeah, I mentioned before we came on, and I do say this sincerely. It's not like in not just being rhetorical. I'm not sure how much. Some of it seems grift. Some of it just seems really grifty because when I first met her, it she seemed just kind of like a more of a liberal theist. But kind of more recently, she seems to some of these arguments kind of slide towards almost young Earth creationism. She like said, "Look at the trees," at one point, or saying things like DNA is perfectly designed, and so it's like, whew,
Yeah,
it's
that may be her moving toward like Hugh Ross's young Earth old Earth creationism, kind of like an intelligent design kind of belief.
Yeah, that's true.
Which young Earth creationism entails intelligent design. It has to, but intelligent design does not entail young Earth creationism, because there's
Right.
obviously plenty who don't believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old. I think that's where she leans. I think she leans toward an old Earth, but she also goes where the wind blows.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
true.
she does. She just, whoever's popular at the time, whoever she's reading is the person she's going to probably, except for Bart Ehrman, except for him, because
Well, he's a dirty atheist, so
he is. He's going to hell, and man, he's just, not that I'm convinced she's actually read Ehrman. I think she skims.
Yeah.
I've written about that on my blog.
Kind
I don't think she's
peeks around the page and goes,
"Oh yeah." I mean, do I have cliff notes on this?
There's no notes version.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. And at any rate, there was a video that came out a little while back. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it because I think it was very interesting. It was by Trey the Explainer. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he usually does videos on like evolutionary history and stuff, but he has done a couple on biblical history. He looks at and not just kind of in the, well, it's wrong because evolution's true, but he looks at the language of how some of the different words have evolved as the Bible has been translated over and over. He did one with the Leviathan.
Yeah.
Comparing like, okay, this is what this says about it. This is what this says about it, and like, okay, obviously it's not just a mosasaur or something like that.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah. Or Behemoth was a
brachiosaurus. Yeah.
I mean, just absolutely don't. I mean, but see, I have to sympathize because that's what I believed.
Yeah.
I used to believe that the Behemoth of Job was some kind of dinosaur, but now I'm like, oh, that was bad, Ben. Don't do that.
Is that another reference? Like both of those is that another reference to kind of the henotheistic aspect of it?
So that's a good question, because the Leviathan actually comes from the Canaanite mythology. There's a entity called the Litan, or Litan. It's Litan, but it's almost like a personification of the sea god Yam.
Okay.
And so in the Baal cycle, the Baal cycle, there's a conflict between Yam, who's the goddess of the sea, and Baal. Baal's trying to take over, and he's trying to rule the cosmos, and he is described as conquering the Litan, the Latan, whatever you want to call him, and it's described as the twisting serpent, which is interesting because in the book of Job and in the book of Isaiah, the Leviathan is called the twisting serpent. The fleeing serpent is another term used. So this is imagery borrowed from a Canaanite mythology, and it represents a kind of a deity that God subdues in the creation process. And in the case of Isaiah, it's probably a reference maybe to an kind of an eschatological dragon that he conquers at the end of time. But in any case, yeah. So the Leviathan likely represents a entity that he has conquered. In fact, I think it may be in Job where he describes it, and maybe in the Psalms. But either way, he describes it as kind of like a bathtub toy. Like this entity has become so nothing to him because God is so powerful that this is nothing but like a rubber ducky with Ernie in the bathtub. Right. That's all it is, Huh. But you still see that borrowing from Canaanite mythology, which is absolutely cool to me. I think it's fascinating.
Oh yeah, definitely. I believe in Genesis it said, I read something once, and I don't have any way to check the validity because I don't read Hebrew or anything.
Well, hey, you and S.J. Thomason both. You both read something once. And only once.
And we have no way to check the validity of it. Yeah. There was this this article talking about some of the things that have been sort of Christianized, some of the imagery and one of them was the beasts of the sea in Genesis was not a reference to like whales and things like that, but was actually a reference to, as you said, like the Leviathan and such
Sea
similar
monsters.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, which would be perfect to them. In fact, I think the Septuagint, when you read the Septuagint, the term it uses is, I believe, I may be wrong on this. I wrote about this. You think I would remember, but
No,
is a
I
term.
totally I understand it.
The term used is a term for sea monster. In fact, it's the same term used in the book of Jonah in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation, to describe the fish, the whale, whatever you want to call it, that swallows Jonah. And it's the word that Jesus uses when he talks about the sign of Jonah in Matthew, I believe it's Matthew 12. He talks about as Jonah was in the belly of the sea monster, and it's this Greek word that is also used in Genesis in the Greek, and it means literally some kind of sea beast, some kind of mythological animal.
Hmm.
I think the Hebrew reflects that as well. I think that's also what's going on there. But yeah, you're right. It's been modernized. It's been made more palatable because who believes in sea monsters nowadays?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I
Nobody
mean?
believes in sea.
Nobody believes that. So this has got to be a whale. It's got to be, baby beluga in the deep blue sea, not some monstrous kraken or something.
Right. Yeah, that is quite fascinating. We do have a question from
Yeah,
Nestlig. Um, he says he thinks Leviathan is an ordinary reptile, maybe a crocodile, and that the fiery breath is actually referencing the hissing sound that the reptiles make.
yeah. That's actually a possibility. It's very possible that these are references to actual physical animals that existed. The behemoth, which appears in the chapter before the story of Leviathan in the book of Job, could very well be a hippopotamus.
Hmm.
I'd have no problem with that. I think there's something more going on. The reason I think that is because in that section of the book of Job, so what happens is, I'm sure you're familiar with Job somewhat.
Yeah,
It's the
and
guy who suffers for no effing reason,
God said to
and
watch this. Yeah.
oh, so the first part is Job. He kind of complains about it. He accepts it at first, and then he complains about it. And then he has these really crappy friends that show up and try to make it. What did you screwed up? What did you do? And he's like, I haven't done anything. Like I'm sinless. I haven't done anything. But he still complains. He's upset. And then there's this other character. I think it's Eliphaz, who probably wasn't original to the story. Probably added later by another scribe. He comes in. He's not really any better. But then in Job 38, it says that God appears to Job in a whirlwind. So it's this show of force. And then he starts like almost like an attorney, like a prosecutor at a trial. Where were you when this happened? When I made the universe, where were you? Where were you when this happened? And so he continues in that thread, and then he culminates in chapter 38 or chapter 40 with the description of the behemoth, which could be hippopotamus. But I think there's something bigger going on. It's more of a cosmic creature. It represents the strength of God. He's made this incredible animal, but it's Yahweh that made it. This isn't his enemy. Yahweh made this creature. Same thing with Leviathan. This is God's work. So I think these are cosmic beings in Job, not real physical animals. But it's very possible as
maybe there's like a kernel in there somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. So you'll see that commonly in commentaries on the subject. So it could be a crocodile. Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That is really neat. It's really neat to think about. That because it seems kind of like, well, with the pop apologists, like there's just this one grand unified narrative, and it's kind of always been this way, and nothing's really changed about it. But really, the concept of a single, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, that is a recent addition.
Well, I mean, to a degree. So there, in ancient Egypt, there was a pharaoh who leaned towards some kind of monotheism.
Was that Aten?
Well, that was the god he worshipped, which was basically a sun god. Akhenaten was the yeah. Thank you. I couldn't remember the name, but yeah. So he kind of leaned toward a monotheism, but it didn't last. Like it wasn't. They reverted back to worshiping Osiris and all these other deities alongside Osiris. But in terms of, we have to be careful when we talk about ancient religious beliefs of Israel, because we almost look at it as like there's this trajectory, like it's all this teleologically, it's going to end up at monotheism. And it could have, it might not have, it might have ended up being something different. But there's always this belief, at least from about the 10th century on, that Yahweh, or the 11th century, that Yahweh is the supreme God. There's always this very tight grip on him as their deity. Whether or not they believed in multiple other gods, Yahweh is supreme. And I think that, we got to be careful about talking about the evolution of Israelite religion. It's tempting to say, well, monotheism is more recent. Well, I mean, maybe in some ways it is, but the seeds are certainly there. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So if I didn't say that, some apologist would watch this video and be like, "No, he's not reading this scholar." Michael Heiser says.
Yeah, it is really fun to watch you go back and forth with them on Twitter.
That goes to my blood pressure. That's
yeah, that's oh Lord, yeah. No, yeah, dealing with yeah, no, I definitely sympathize with that.
Oh yeah, I've seen some of your run-ins with creationists, and I'm just like, no.
Oh Christ, I'm sorry.
Oh.
On Twitter?
Oh yeah.
I try not to get too upset about it. The people who make me really mad are like Nephilim Free and Jungle Jargon. These guys who are just, there's just no getting to them.
They're willfully ignorant. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And so it's like and so I just kind of resigned at this point. I'm like, I'm not talking to you guys. I'm not doing it
the mute
anymore.
button. The mute button is our friend. I don't block anybody, but I have muted the hell out of some people.
It's funny because people tag me in those. I'm sure they do it to you too. Those chats where it's like 49 people, and I just say nope. As soon as I get tagged in that, I just put it on mute. I'm like, no.
Too many people. Yeah.
I can't do with that. So another thing I want to ask you about, because this is something our favorite apologist has discussed. Would you say that there is a contradiction between the Matthew and Luke birth narratives?
Oh, of course. There's not just one contradiction. There's a million contradictions.
So how are these how are at least the important ones irreconcilable?
Well, so one of the huge ones is the itinerary. So in Matthew's gospel, Jesus is born in Bethlehem. But there's no indication that his parents have lived anywhere else but Bethlehem. Okay? They have a house there, as a matter of fact, in chapter 2. But in Luke says that Joseph and Mary started out in Nazareth. He kind of makes this a big deal, too, because even in chapter 1, where he talks about Mary's family, there's this understanding that Mary is from Nazareth, so is Joseph. So, but complicating both of them is they both relied on the Gospel of Mark. So both Matthew and Luke use Mark. Mark doesn't know. If Mark knows anything about Bethlehem, he is not telling anybody, because he doesn't mention the city one time. Jesus is from Nazareth. He is a Nazarene. So Matthew and Luke both know this. But apparently both Matthew and Luke have a tradition where Jesus is also born in Bethlehem. Whether it's invented, I don't know. Okay, either way, they have it. So they got to get Jesus from Nazareth. They got to get Jesus to Nazareth. But they have this Bethlehem tradition. So Jesus is born in Bethlehem in Matthew and Luke. Matthew starts in Bethlehem. He moves to Egypt. And then he ends up in Nazareth. Luke starts in Nazareth, ends up in Bethlehem, and then ends in Nazareth. There's no Egypt. And so apologists will try to squirm and squeeze it all together to fit. But the problem is Luke's narrative is very specific. Luke says that Jesus is born. On the 8th day, he's circumcised. 40 days later or so, Mary is taken to Jerusalem, where she offers her purification. And then it says, after everything they had done, everything they had completed to fulfill the law of Moses, they move back to Nazareth. They return to Nazareth. Is literally, they go back to it. So this is like Jesus is born, and within 2 months, he's back in Nazareth. So he goes from Bethlehem to Nazareth in just like 2 months. But Matthew gives the impression that he could have been in Bethlehem for 2 years before they moved to Nazareth. You can't cram, 2 years into 40 days. It does not work. The itineraries are completely different. I mean, Luke, everyone talks about how Luke the historian, Luke is this amazing historian, look at the book of Acts. Well, how in the hell does Luke miss the slaughter of the innocents by Herod? Matthew talks about it. Why doesn't Luke?
That would be an important event, yeah.
I would think so. I mean, Josephus doesn't even mention it. And Josephus and hated, Herod, the Herodians. This would have been a perfect anecdote, one of many he could have offered. But Luke doesn't mention it. But Matthew does. So what's going on there? Why, Luke apparently is not as good a historian. But going back to the original question, the major thing for me is the itineraries just are impossible. And there's other little details, too, that kind of show you these are different traditions. The genealogies are different, like really different. But for me, the itinerary is the clincher. That tells me everything I need to know. Like, these are two different traditions, and you can't reconcile them.
Yeah. I've often, I've read a little bit about the time. There's the time difference. It was either, 4 BC or 6 AD? Or is I have it backwards?
With Luke, yeah. So Luke clearly places the birth of Jesus at the time of Herod the Great, and Herod the Great dies around 4 BCE. Matthew does the same. It's Herod the Great is the king of Jerusalem. He dies in 4 BCE. But the problem is, Luke also mentions this census during while the governor of Syria was Quirinius. But he wasn't governor of Syria until 6 CE. So Luke has this vague knowledge of like the history of the time, but it's just not accurate. And he has these little historical errors he makes because he probably doesn't have as reliable as information as he would have liked. So he's kind of guessing. He's kind of shooting in the dark. It's about this time. Caesar's the emperor, Herod's the king, and Quirinius is the governor. But we know Quirinius wasn't the governor. Herod the Great was long dead, for a decade or more by that time. So unless you're a pop apologist,
yeah,
a good way to square those up.
Have you seen our favorite pop apologist points to like some coins with like an alleged inscription that no one can see on there?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. I think Tim O'Neill responded to that in a thread.
Yeah, I think he did.
It was on Quirinius, and he was just like, no, this is the data. This is what we know. And there's other reasons for thinking it about, Herod's death and who was ruling in that area at the time. Matthew's pretty explicit. When Jesus returns, Herod's dead, and his son Archelaus is the ruler of Judea. And so Joseph's like, well, can't go back there. I have to go to Nazareth in Galilee because it's, that was ruled by another Herod. And I can't remember his name. But Luke doesn't quite have that because he doesn't need to. He doesn't have them going to Egypt to flee Herod. He has them going right back to Nazareth where they're already from. So Luke's itinerary is really smooth. Matthew's is kind of like, they got to go to Egypt. They got to escape. But Luke also gets the history wrong.
A historian getting the history wrong.
Yeah. No, not his fault. He just,
we do have one comment. He said, you cannot fit months in a few days. Nestling says, please tell him about the white hole theory where creationists propose that the Earth was inside a black hole such that time dilation kept it young while the universe grew old.
E. Russell Humphreys.
Yep,
Starlight in Time, wrote in the 90s.
There you go.
I devoured that book. Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that.
That's funny. That's very funny. And so I guess kind of another really like major area is what the heck was going on in Revelation? Why is it that you have like epistles and all this stuff and everything is really just kind of what's happening in the area, and then all of a sudden you have Revelation.
Yeah, which is it's a weird book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one thing you need to keep in mind is Revelation is it, it's tempting to look at the book of Revelation and say, oh, it's about the future. And to some degree, to the original author, whoever that was, they went by the name John, it was. But the book starts in chapters 1 and then chapters 2 and 3 as letters to churches in Asia Minor. So what this probably means is this is a pastoral, a polemical kind of work meant to reassure these Christians who are in the midst of probably maybe some persecution or on the eve of persecution. And then also to say the final, Rome doesn't get the final say. These so-called Jews in these synagogues of Satan don't get the final say. Jesus himself, the Lamb who was slain, he is worthy. He gets the final say, and we win. That's kind of the feeling you get from the book of Revelation. But it also, the book of Revelation borrows heavily from the imagery of the prophets in the Hebrew Bible, especially Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah. So if you read the book of Revelation and you haven't read the prophets of the Hebrew Bible, you're going to be a little lost. You really are. Yeah. You're going to be looking at these images like this, this dragon with 12 heads, and go, what the hell is going on with that dragon? But if you read it in light of what the rest of the Bible has said, especially in the Hebrew Bible, they're like, oh, well, this starts to make a little sense. These are symbols. These are images of real world things. So, but that doesn't mean it's easy to interpret. There's stuff in there that I'm like,
sure,
what is going on?
Yeah,
what acid trip was John on when he wrote this?
I've heard that. I don't know where that quote originates, but I think that's hilarious. John on acid. Yeah. Because there's stuff like the manticores and all sorts of things, or the locusts with human. Human heads or something like that.
Human heads. They have crowns on their head. They have. Oh yeah, they're weird looking.
It's like, what in God's name is this?
Yeah, but it's all symbolism. It's all just, unless you're, well, even if you're Tim LaHaye and the Left Behind crowd, it's symbolism. They're fighter jets from Russia. That's what they are. They're fighter jets. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever read Left Behind, the series, but I did. I did. I can't get those years back.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Oof. It's because I read it once, and it is just a major head scratcher if you don't know anything about the area or the history or anything like that. You just kind of read that and you're like, well, all right then.
You have to have some background and like a good study Bible, like the HarperCollins Study Bible or the New Oxford Annotated Bible. I mean, just spend $40, get it, have it on your shelf, read the text, read the notes. They're pretty good, really good to help you understand what's going on.
Oh yeah, definitely got to have the footnotes.
Exactly. Oh yeah, yeah. That's the kryptonite of pop apologists is footnotes.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me. I would have figured reading generally would have been their kryptonite. That works too, I guess.
Yeah, that's probably true.
One thing I did think about, and then I guess we can call it because it's almost at an hour, is I remember watched an R&R video way back and talked about the prophecy of Tyre, of the destruction of Tyre. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Just how it's a colossal failure.
Yeah. Really, you need to ask Josh Bowen about this because he did a couple videos on this. But in the book of Ezekiel, there's this prophecy against the city of Tyre. So if you don't know what Tyre is, it was a city on the coast in the Mediterranean. Was it the Mediterranean? I'm getting my geography probably wrong. But either way, it's prophesied against that it's going to be totally destroyed, wiped out. Okay, This is common language in the Hebrew Bible. We're going to totally wipe these people out, And I think it's I don't know who the king is who comes in, but it doesn't happen. The city is not wiped out. So then a few chapters later, there's this like modified prophecy where it's like, well, you couldn't. It was Nebuchadnezzar. You can't. Well, you couldn't take Tyre, but we're going to give you Egypt. and that doesn't happen exactly, So it's like, obviously there's an author writing in this time period, and he thinks he knows what the hell's going on, but he clearly doesn't. He cannot predict these geopolitical realities.
Sure. Yeah.
So something similar goes on in the book of Daniel. When you read, I think it's in chapter 10. He's got all these prophecies, and they're really super accurate, and they're all about Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth. And then all of a sudden it gets to the point where he prophesies how Antiochus is going to die without calling him Antiochus. And then but none of that happens. So then what happened is he wrote these prophecies in hindsight, okay? And he's living in this moment, and he thinks he knows what's going to happen next, but he's not really good. He's no groundhog. He's he's not Punxsutawney Phil. But so you can use that as evidence to root him in a moment in history. He knows what happened in the past, and he prophesies, right. But he doesn't know the future, and he gets it wrong. So I think that's what's going on in Ezekiel. I think that's, he's writing in a certain time. He screws it up. He modifies it. We'll go to Egypt instead. That'll work out better. Did you just forget what you said about Tyre?
It's kind of interesting. It's like, why do you think it was kept in? They're like, well, this didn't happen, but we're going to keep it anyways. Like, what was...
Yeah, well, for the same reason that all the contradictions in the Pentateuch, the Torah, are kept. Why do we have two creation stories that contradict each other? Why do we have different versions of the Noah story that contradict one another? It's because these authors didn't have a problem with it. They did not have a problem with contradiction. At times, they tried to smooth it over if it was especially egregious, but they respected their tradition so much that they were willing to allow multiple voices to speak, even if they disagreed. And this is the key thing about what I've learned about Judaism in general, and just if you'll hear rabbis talk about the willingness, the freedom to disagree, even with the Bible itself, but to have the conversation. It's the conversation that's important. And I think these biblical authors, they just had no problem. I mean, how many animals went in the ark? 2 or 7? 2 of each kind, or 7? Huh? Both. Well, that contradicts. Okay, that's fine. We'll keep it. Tyre doesn't get destroyed. Well, all right. Well, so what? We'll keep it because it represents their tradition. And I think that's part of the explanation why it's retained. They were comfortable with it. But modern people, we just aren't comfortable with contradictions. We need things to be smoothed over, especially if we hold certain views about the Bible, like inerrancy.
Yeah, which was it in Daniel? The supposed prediction of, like, they pierced my hands and feet. Is that in Daniel? Or
in Zechariah chapter 12. Yeah. Okay. They shall look on me whom they have pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for their only son. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And I've seen people do basically it's like this is refuted if you actually look at the entire paragraph and not just the one line. Well, yeah, that's the thing, is you have to look at it in context. And New Testament authors tended to, I would call it eisegesis, ripping out the text. They were okay with that, whereas we wouldn't be, because we want the context to determine what the meaning is, But yeah.
That's pretty funny. We actually we do have one interesting question in here.
Okay.
And this is something I wish I'd written down, but I didn't. What happened to the texts that didn't become biblical canon, like Enoch and those other books? What happened? Why was that happening?
Well, so we still have a lot of these texts extant. Not all religious communities viewed all the texts that were available as scripture, but some did. So you'll find at Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, you'll find texts of the Bible that, frankly, aren't in the Hebrew canon. Christians today would not accept them. But the Essenes, who were the people who lived at Qumran, they viewed them as authoritative, in addition to the Hebrew Bible. And they used these texts to frame their own views of how the world was going to end because they were apocalyptic. They thought the end was coming soon, and they wrote stories. The book of Enoch, First Enoch, falls into that, and other texts too. And this happens even in the New Testament with texts like the Shepherd of Hermas or the
Oh
Epistle
yeah,
of Barnabas.
yeah, that's right.
Same kind of thing. Is some communities believe they were scripture, others didn't. In the end, the ones that were more widely used were retained as the canon.
Right.
Wasn't at the Council of Nicaea, as some people like to say. That's not how the canon was formed. It had nothing to do with Constantine.
How was the canon formed?
Well, so I did a video on this for my Quora questions, but the short answer, and that video was short anyway, so I tried to keep it short. Is basically the canon isn't so much what people said was authoritative, like they put their stamp on it. The canon emerged out of a consensus, is saying that we've used these texts consistently and regularly in our worship, and so the canon forms kind of gradually on that basis. And there's always this core. The Gospels are always there. The Pauline epistles are always there. Some of the there's some debate about like 1 John, 2 John, 3 John. The book of Revelation was debated. The book of Hebrews, some of the Peter, like 1 and 2 Peter. These are all texts that some of them are debated, and some are rejected by some groups and some are accepted by others. But in the end, by the end of the 4th century, with the canon of Athanasius, you have the 27 books of the New Testament as we know them. That doesn't mean other groups weren't using these other texts. In fact, 2 codices, well, I know one does, Codex Sinaiticus, which is it has the Septuagint and the New Testament, retains, if memory serves, the Shepherd of Hermas, which is not in our modern New Testament. So there's other books that are included that slip in that today Christians would be like, no, they're valuable for history, but they're not valuable as the authoritative Word of God.
Right.
But yeah, the winners of orthodoxy are the ones who pretty much ended up determining what is in our canon, but it wasn't because they declared by fiat, this is the Bible. It was just how it worked out and who used what.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'd heard things similar to that. It's what was widely read at the time.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's often what made it
exactly.
Which doesn't sound very very objective. Doesn't sound like God just kind of dropped it down and was like, there you go, the Bible.
Yeah. You would hope that God would do something like that, but I don't know. He was too busy. He had just married Asherah and hooked up with Mary, so he had his hands full with 2 baby mamas. I don't know.
You know what? I hope that becomes like a historical hypothesis. Like God was too busy with his 2 baby mamas to to finish his last word to creation.
Exactly. It sounds plausible.
I like it too much for it to not be true. So.
Exactly, and that's what we should make true. That's how a certain pop apologist works. So why not?
It's only certain. Wow, that's
well. There's others, but I got one in mind.
Right. Well, we're just past the hour, so I do want to say thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. I learned a lot.
Well, I did too.
And I will link. Oh, well, that's good. I don't remember saying much of anything.
I talk a lot.
It wasn't like we were. Well, I mean, we did talk a little bit about that kind of stuff, but this was about you, to be fair. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I will link your blog in the description if you could stick around for 1 minute after I get off.
Yeah.
Yep. So this was fun. We got a number of questions from the audience. They seem to have enjoyed it. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you again for coming on.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to end the stream. Bye, everybody.